Good afternoon and welcome to the Narrow Path radio broadcast. My name is Steve Gregg and we're live for an hour each weekday afternoon, including today when you can, during the program, you can call in live to ask questions for conversation about the Bible or the Christian faith, or express difference of opinion that you have from the host about the Bible or Christianity. These questions will be occupying the whole hour without any commercial breaks. Our lines are full at the moment, but all of them will almost certainly be opening during the course of the hour, and you may occupy one if you call at the right time. I would suggest, if you want to be on and you're not already on our switchboard, that you just call randomly during the hour at this number, 844-484-5737. That's 844-484-5737. Yeah, you can probably tell my voice isn't normal. Yeah, it gets that way sometimes. It's just, I assume it's just from talking too much. I do talk probably too much, but anyway, it doesn't hurt. Some people wonder, when they hear hoarseness, if it hurts. It does not. It's just something for you. It just hurts the ears. So pay no attention to it if you can avoid it, if you can ignore it. All right, we're going to go to the phones, but let me just say, for those who do not know this already, we have listeners all over the country, and I'm going to be in 3 of our listening areas speaking live in the next several weeks. The last week and a half, I should just say that last week of this month and first week of October, I will be in the Seattle area speaking in lots of places. Any of our listeners in Western Washington should check our website under announcements and see if I may be speaking in your neighborhood. I'm speaking virtually every day for 2 weeks, and that in a variety of places in Western Washington. So Seattle area and points north and south of that. So if you're in the area, you might look at our calendar and see. Then after that, I'm home for a very brief time. Then I'm going to Nashville for a long weekend to speak. And that will be, I believe, the second weekend of October. And then I think it's the following weekend, the third weekend of October, if I'm not mistaken, I'll be in Sacramento. And that area is speaking for several days, including one major event that actually is what anchored me there at that time. The radio station in Sacramento has asked if I would do an event along with Rabbi Schneider, who is the host of a program that's, I think, also on most of our stations. Rabbi Schneider, I have not met. I don't know him. I don't even know his views very well. But the idea was we probably see some things differently on the subject of Israel, and we'll be talking about Israel. That's on the 17th of October. So we got a lot of things coming up in the Seattle area, Nashville area, and Sacramento. And we've got lots of listeners, I should say, in all of those places. You'll find the information about those dates at our website, thenarrowpath.com, thenarrowpath.com. And that's under the tab that says announcements. Now you know why my voice gets worn out, because I speak so many times and places. All right, let's talk to Dwight from Denver, Colorado, who I have met on one of my trips in Denver before. Hi, Dwight. Welcome.
Hi, Steve. Good to talk again. I wanted to ask you a question about a woman in her, I think, mid-80s who's been coming to our church for probably a year now. She appears to have been recently born again. She's reading through her Bible every day. She has loads of questions after church, and we try to answer all of them. But a while back, she mentioned that she had seen her daughter, who had died decades earlier. She had physically seen her daughter. Their daughter came up to her and stroked her shoulder and said, "I'm okay." And this lady said that it was a beautiful, peaceful experience. And we kind of, warned her about that. And she got up and left. offended. And then since she apologized for that, but just this past Sunday, she claimed that she had recently seen her husband, who died a few years ago, up in the corner of her ceiling, and she saw him from the chest up, and he asked her why, and she said, "Because I love you," and I have no idea what the context of that was, but she wants to know why she is seeing these things, and I'm just wondering if we should tell her that somehow she may have opened the door to demonic activity, and maybe that's why she's seeing those things. What do you think?
Well, I do believe that people who are involved in the occult, and maybe some people who are not, can see apparitions that are of demonic origin. But I'm not of the opinion that all apparitions are necessarily of demonic origin. In fact, some may very well just be the imagination. Obviously, a woman who's lost her husband and her child has a strong emotional incentive to see them. Anybody who's lost loved ones would like to think that they're watching over them, and there's still a connection, and different people's minds play different kinds of tricks. So I wouldn't assume necessarily this woman's involved in the demonic unless she's going to seances or trying to conjure these things. See, the Bible does forbid us to attempt to contact the dead. And so going to a seance or something like that would be a sin and dangerous. But it doesn't say that we are bad if something appears to us that we don't, that we can't explain. It could be demonic appearances. It could be her mere imagination. And I'm going to suggest a third option that I'm not saying it's likely, but I don't know it to be impossible. It's not impossible that God could give such assurances through a visual vision like that. I mean, while it is impossible for us to legitimately contact the dead, we don't know that it's impossible for God to send people now dead, to appear to us at one point or another for some special reasons. I mean, Moses and Elijah appeared to Jesus after Moses had died and Elijah had been long gone. Obviously, that's exceptional. I mean, that is a unique case, but we don't know that all such appearances are necessarily unique cases. I would say I would not worry about it unless this became something obsessive and she was, seeking to contact her dead daughter or her dead husband, and, or if she's just saying, hey, I saw this, we can't say what she saw or didn't see. She could have seen something demonic. She could have seen something merely imaginary. In perhaps maybe a case I consider very unlikely, God may have sent her a visual comfort in that way. But I'm not making a judgment about it. I would just say, if she's a fairly young Christian, I wouldn't try to alienate her by saying, oh, that's demonic. What I would suggest to her is, it's not a normative thing for the living to have any contact with the dead, and the Bible forbids us to seek it. And if, without our seeking it, some apparition of this sort appears, we should judge whether the effects of it are tend toward our drawing nearer to God or toward our being distracted from God. I mean, the devil could easily use such things to distract or to make us more, to love God more. I would say if you have no way of knowing, and if there's nothing overtly evil or whatever about it, then I would just say you'll know it by its fruit. However, I would say if these things began to happen frequently, that would be a concern to me, because while God might do something uniquely once, for that to happen all the time would raise deep suspicions as to whether it's godly.
Yes, I believe that. Okay, well, that's very helpful. Thank you so much.
Okay, Dwight, good talking to you again. God bless. Josh from Phoenix, Arizona, welcome to the Narrow Path.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me today. I got to thank you for putting your teachings online for the past 3 weeks. I've really been thoroughly enjoying listening to the When Shall These Things Be teachings that you have. Mm-hmm. I've been trying to share some of that with friends, some friends and some brothers and sisters at church, and
good luck.
Some have received it. Yeah. Some have received it. Today I was asked if I was even a Christian, but nonetheless, I really thank you for putting it out there. And my only choice that I'm having to deal with right now is, do I want to go through Revelation or Romans next? Because they both, I'm sure they're excellent teachings. So thanks for that. But my question today,
I would say Romans is more important than Revelation.
Thank you. You made my decision for me.
Okay.
All right. Well, my actual question today is from Matthew 24, and that's verse 35. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. I heard on the internet that is a reference, heaven and earth is a reference to the temple or the temple system, and that might be metonymy, I think is the word, which is kind of like an idiom. Is there any validity to that?
Well, it is certainly claimed frequently. It's a major claim of the full preterist position. Now, I consider the full preterist to be a wrong position. But not all who make that claim are full preterists. Some people who are partial preterists would say it too. I wrote a book against full preterism, and 2 full chapters deal with this question. The question of whether the Bible speaks of heaven and earth as a metaphor for the temple system. The preterists, I'm going to say the full preterists, but though some partial preterists have followed them in this, have suggested that it was a commonplace for the Jews of that time to speak of the temple system as the heavens and the earth. Now, I've looked for, I've looked at the footnotes where they say this is where they found that out, because I mean, none of us were living back there in Jerusalem, so we can't know, unless there's some writings about it, whether they thought that way or not. Now, the only footnotes I have discovered from their writings justifying this claim have been a few paragraphs from Josephus. And what Josephus said was that the Jews considered the temple to be the connecting place between heaven and earth. That's something different than saying it was the heavens and the earth, but that it was the portal. It was the portal connecting where people connect with heaven and earth. And he also said that many of the ornaments that Solomon built into the architecture of the temple corresponded to or represented, like nature and the creation elements of it and so forth. Well, that's a very far cry. I mean, okay, so I'm not surprised. Frankly, ancient pagan temples also have lots of engravings in them that represent nature. I mean, certain Hindu temples have engravings of animals in their pillars and things like that. This is a very different observation than claiming that heaven and earth had become a common phrase among the Jews to refer to the temple system. I have not found any case. Now, I'm not opposed to it. I mean, I'm not. That is, if people showed me documentation that this was true, then I'm always willing to learn. There's nothing about that claim that I would find repugnant or be resistant to. It's just that the claim is made so freely without any reference to any documentation. And so, I mean, if someone has the documentation, I'd be glad to see it. I'm not saying it isn't out there. Maybe it is. Lots of people have read more broadly about many things than I have, and it's possible it's out there. But having read those who claim it and looking at their footnotes, where they give what they consider to be the justification for the claim, their footnotes do not justify the claim at all. Now, more than that, even if we allowed, and we don't know this to be true, or at least I don't know this to be true, even if we allowed that the Jews commonly referred to the temple system as heaven and earth, and this is what claim is made that I've not seen verified, so I don't necessarily accept it, but it could be true. But even if it's true that the Jews commonly spoke that way, the question for us would be, did Jesus speak that way? Did the biblical writers speak that way? And in my book, I have 2 full chapters analyzing the use of the terms heaven and earth, which there are over 100 such occurrences in the Bible, and pointing out that in every single case, with the exception of maybe 3, heaven and earth obviously simply refers to the earth and the sky. It does not refer to the temple system or the Jewish system at all. Now, I say with the exception of maybe 3, these 3 are cases where it's ambiguous. And one might argue that it's referring to the temple system, and you couldn't prove them wrong. But they couldn't prove that to be right either. These would be extreme exceptions, very rare exceptions to the overall usage of those terms over 100 times throughout the Bible. So I would say when people say, well, heaven and earth, that's just a biblical, or it's certainly not a biblical, but it might be a Jewish way of speaking of the temple system. I'm listening. Show me where you get that information. Unfortunately, people read full preterist literature, and the full preterists make all kinds of claims that are very much like this, for which they give no documentation. You're just supposed to believe them because they said it. And I'm just not that gullible. You need to show me. I'm a show me kind of a guy. And so
show me the money.
Yeah, show me the money. So I don't really think that is a correct statement.
Okay, well, awesome. Thanks, Steve. I think we wrap that up, and I'll be listening to your Romans teaching series, and hope to talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Okay, Josh. God bless. I know. Jim from somewhere in California, welcome.
Yes, hi. I'm not going to watch the debate tonight between President Trump and Kamala Harris. I don't have a desire to do it. I pretty much know where they both stand on the policies, and I think all it would do is confuse me.
Really? Well, okay, then don't watch it.
I won't. I just,
okay.
As a Christian, I'm a Christian, and I don't want to get all tangled up in their half-truths, in the way I look at it.
Well, I'm not sure how much you've followed their political careers and the policies they've championed over the past, let's say, 8 years. But if you have, you certainly probably will not learn anything from the debate, and you can maybe spend your time in better ways than to watch it. For people who have not followed their careers. Okay, but if you have followed their careers carefully, and you do watch it, you will recognize which truths are half-truths, and which aren't even halfway true. You know, I mean, some are the opposite of the truth. So, it depends. If you truly are knowledgeable of these things, then any half-truths they tell will not fool you. On the other hand, I personally think that the debate is going to be very useful for the country in general, only because the country seems to be almost equally divided between their propensity to vote Democrat or Republican for one candidate or the other, and yet the majority of those who plan to vote Democrat could not tell you what any of Kamala's party's platform is, because she has not told us herself. Now, anyone who's followed her career for the past 8 years knows very well what she stands for. She has initiated bills promoting things that she now says she's for the opposite. She doesn't say why she's for the opposite, but it's interesting that distancing herself from her past activities is very profitable for her in terms of the election, because her past activities have all been the most far left policies that any senator ever sponsored, and it is said that she's the closest in her policies to communism, frankly, more than even Bernie Sanders, who's of the Socialist Party. They say she's far to the left of Bernie, and this was something she was saying before. People said about her before she was running against Trump, and before anyone ever thought she'd have any chance of being president. This was simply the analysis of her as a not very important senator before she was vice president. So, I mean, these people who analyze politicians and their policies have always recognized her as the most far left senator that we've ever had, or at least we have currently. Well, she's not a senator now. But the suggestion that she has spent her whole life promoting woke and left-wing causes. But suddenly, when she realizes that these don't play well with the electorate, she now says that she's actually copied a great number of her alleged new policies from Trump. She's for the wall. She said she's going to, there'll be no tax on tips. Trump had announced that some weeks before she came up with it. I mean, many of the things that Trump has said and even done when he was a president, she's suddenly saying she's for them, even though at the time Trump did them, she and other people on the left said they were absurd and bad and so forth. But now she's for them because she realizes that her actual policies, the things she really believes, are not going to get her elected. The United States populace is not yet ready for communism here. And so she has, just in the last few weeks, shifted her alleged position on almost everything that she not only stood for before, but she passed at least 2 or 3 bills, and she cast the deciding vote as vice president, the tie-breaking vote on some of them that were pushing things she says are now she doesn't believe anymore. So I would say, if as recently as the past 3 years she was throwing all her weight in favor of certain policies, and suddenly in the last few weeks she decided, because they're not politically expedient, she doesn't believe that anymore. But she can't tell us why. My guess is she still does believe them. And she's, in fact, Bernie Sanders himself, you might have heard just yesterday, many of the news outlets were showing Bernie Sanders on an interview where someone asked him, why do you think Kamala has shifted on all her left-wing positions to take a more centrist position? And he says, I don't think she shifted on positions. She just knows what she has to do to get elected. Now, he's favorable toward her. And he just said out loud the things that everyone knows. Who knows what's going on? Anyway, if you don't want to see the debate, that's fine. But I think that most people should, if they don't know what she stands for, because that, I think, is going to be exposed. I hope. If it isn't, then the debates are of no value. Thanks for your call, Jim. Michael from Connecticut, welcome to the Narrow Path.
Hi, Steve. Good to hear you, as always.
Long time. You're really calling from where? Salinas? You're calling from Watsonville, really?
Santa Cruz, but my heart is in Connecticut with my mom. I'm hoping to move back there when I can. Anyway, I just wanted to ask you a quick question. So is a general understanding in Christianity as a whole that when one is born again, when one is justified by faith, that one's old spirit is displaced or replaced by a new spirit? Would that be the view in all the Protestant theologies and in the Catholic and Orthodox theologies?
That's not the way I've heard Christians describe it. It's not the way I would describe it. I think rather than saying that our old spirit is replaced by a new spirit, the more Christian jargon would be that we were spiritually dead in trespasses and sins, and that dead spirit has been brought to life in Christ. So it's not so much that a new spirit has replaced the old, but the old has been vivified or brought to life by rebirth. Now, some Christians have floated the idea that when they're born again and the Holy Spirit comes into them, that instead of them having a spirit of their own, the Holy Spirit becomes their spirit. This, however, is not what the Bible teaches. The Bible says in Romans chapter 8 that the Holy Spirit bears witness with our spirits that we are the children of God. So there's the Holy Spirit and there's our spirit separately, and the two are in communion, and the one is bearing witness to the other. So, I'm not sure really how all this affects behavior, but as far as answering your question goes, technically Christians have not taught that you had an old spirit and it's now gone. Now, what you may have heard, some Christians say that the Bible teaches we had an old self and that we have a new self. And since our physical body is the same as the old one, you might think they're talking about a new spirit or even a new soul. But this is not really, this comes from a mistranslation of Paul's writings. There are many modern translations that have in Paul's writings numerous references to the old self and the new self. Paul never used that expression anywhere. The expressions he used, which are found more accurately in older translations, he used the expression the old man and the new man. Now, the word man is anthropos. It means man. It doesn't mean self, autos. It's a different phrase. So the modern translations are mistranslating when they say the old self or the new self. What Paul said is we have put off the old man and put on the new man. And in Paul's thinking, the old man is a corporate entity in Adam. And the new man is a corporate entity in Christ, the body of Christ. We have put on Christ, the new man. And we've put off our identity in Adam. We're now identified with Christ. So that's what the expression would mean, rather than, we've got a different spirit that replaced an old spirit in us. I appreciate your call, Michael. We got to take a break, but I'm sure we'll talk again. Michael and I have been talking on the air for about 25 years. He's been calling. He's a Buddhist, and it's always good to hear from him. You're listening to The Narrow Path. We have a break of just less than a minute, and we need to let you know that The Narrow Path is listener-supported. If you want to know how to help us out, go to our website, thenarrowpath.com. There's a tab that says Donate, and that'll help you out. I'll be back in 30 seconds. We have another half hour. Don't go away.
In the series, When Shall These Things Be?, you'll learn that the biblical teaching concerning the rapture, the tribulation, Armageddon, the Antichrist, and the millennium are not necessarily in agreement with the wild sensationalist versions of these doctrines found in popular prophecy teaching and Christian fiction. The lecture series entitled When Shall These Things Be? Can be downloaded without charge from our website, thenarrowpath.com.
Welcome back to The Narrow Path radio broadcast. My name is Steve Gregg, and we're live for another half hour taking your calls. Our lines are full at the moment, but again, if you want to try randomly later in the half hour, you may find a line has opened and you can get through. The number is 844-484-5737. All right, we're going to go to the phone lines and talk to Carrie from Texas. Hi, Carrie. Welcome to The Narrow Path.
Well, thank you, Steve. First of all, I hope your statement that this country's not ready for communist rule comes true.
Yeah. Well, I think most voters are not. Most voters are not, but they can be deceived into believing a candidate believes something else. Yeah.
Well, listen, I'm a pretty good listener to your teachings on the Narrow Path website, and I really appreciate those. I've gained a lot of insight. But one thing, you refer to the Greek and the Hebrew language quite often, and I think I've heard you say that you're not a Greek or Hebrew scholar. So I'm just wondering, for my curiosity, where your expertise or your learning comes from when you start making these references.
Sure. Well, I'd be glad to discuss that. You're right. I'm not a Greek or Hebrew scholar. I'm not even proficient enough to read the Greek text or the Hebrew text. So that's how much I'm not a Greek or Hebrew scholar. On the other hand, you don't have to be a scholar to know the meanings of some words in other languages. For example, I don't speak Spanish or German, but I know that adios means goodbye and gesundheit means health. Those you learn simply by exposure the meanings of words in other languages that are used within the realm of the literature you read, or the persons with which you converse, or the conversations you overhear. In the case of my knowledge of Greek and Hebrew is very anecdotal. Just like I know that adios means goodbye in Spanish, I know that agape means love in Greek. But the difference is I know a whole lot more words in Greek and Hebrew than I do in Spanish or German, even though I studied German for 3 years. And that's because as a Bible teacher, one is obliged to learn what the Greek and Hebrew text says. Now, a person is not always obliged to learn to read the language himself, because biblical studies have been such a popular field in English-speaking world for centuries that many lexical and foreign language study aids have been published in the English language. You wouldn't find as many if you were a Christian in, say, Japan or probably even Norway. You probably wouldn't find as many lexical aids available in your language. But the English language has been formed in largely in parts of the world where people believe and study the Bible, and therefore, because many people have pursued biblical studies, publishers have found it, profitable to publish in English, access tools for knowing the language. So, on my shelf, for example, I have what any Christian in America could get. I probably have 6 or 8 lexicons of the highest, respectability, where I can look up an English word and see in the Bible what Greek words are there or what Hebrew words are there, and an explanation from the scholars in those languages of what those words mean and what their characteristics are and so forth. Now, it'd be much nicer if I could speak fluent Greek or read it fluently. I'd love that. I've spent my life learning other things than those languages, but in the course of the things I have studied, it has taken me to these lexical aids thousands of times. Now, I'm not kidding when I say thousands of times. I've been teaching the Bible for 55 years. Merely 20 visits to the lexicon would be 1,000 times or more that I've been to it. Now, so that means that unlike Spanish, where I could tell you what half a dozen words may mean in Spanish, or in German, a slightly larger number, in Greek and Hebrew, I could tell you what scores, maybe hundreds of words mean. That doesn't make me an expert, but it makes it possible when teaching for me to say, in this passage, this word that's translated perfect is also the same word that's translated mature. Okay? Now, anyone can learn that without learning Greek. They simply can look it up. And I've spent many, many years, decades actually, looking these things up. Now, I would certainly not pit my knowledge of Greek against anybody who's a Greek or Hebrew scholar. Not at all. And when I make a comment based on the Greek or the Hebrew, I'm not pretending to be an expert. I'm just claiming to have access to information that any English-speaking person could have. Not everyone has the same library I have or the same vocation I have, which causes me to be looking up stuff all the time in this area. But certainly there are people who know Greek and Hebrew, 1,000 times better. Well, I'm not going to say 1,000 times better, 100 times better than I do. But those are the people I read. Those are the people I access when I'm trying to figure out what the Greek or Hebrew word means. I'm actually reading from those people who do know 100 times more than I do, which is the only way people really learn foreign languages anyway. So that's. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Would there be anybody that you would say you lean on more heavily than anybody else, like maybe F.F. Bruce, or I know that you find him,
I very much like F.F. Bruce. Yeah, he's one of my favorite commentators. Now, a good commentator, of course, well, generally speaking, if he's a scholar, he'll have a working knowledge of Greek and Hebrew. He might even be an expert in those languages, but there's hardly a commentator out there that doesn't have a working knowledge of those languages. And most commentaries are written by people who are professors of biblical material at universities, and they can't get that position without having learned to read Greek and Hebrew at some level. So yeah, when I read F.F. Bruce's commentaries, of course he's not teaching Greek, he's teaching the Bible. But in the course of teaching the Bible, just like me, I don't teach Greek or Hebrew, but in the course of teaching the Bible, there is exposition on certain words that occur and their implications. I've read I've read probably scores of commentaries by people who discuss those things. But even I don't just trust them, although I do think that they know more than I do. But I will use lexicons primarily if I'm going to insist as part of an argument that a Greek or Hebrew word means such and such. I'm going to use not so much the commentaries as the lexicons. The lexicons are the best sources of information. I've got a bunch of those, and they're the same ones that most scholars would have on their shelves. They're the same ones most people would quote as authorities. So lexicons and commentaries, like in my book on hell, I have a chapter about the meaning of aionios, which is the word usually translated as everlasting. Well, I consult all the, or at least most of the very best lexicons to give the meaning they give. I also quote commentators who themselves, of course, know the language and what they say about it. And I do all that because I don't expect anyone to see me as a Greek scholar, but anyone who's not a scholar can quote people who are. So, and that's what I do. I don't claim Greek or Hebrew scholarship. I simply am as capable as anyone is of quoting people who are the experts in those. And I've spent maybe more time than the average person has in reading them and accessing them. So that'd be the extent of my authority on those subjects.
Well, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate it.
All right, brother. Good talking to you. All right, our next caller is Craig from Washington State. Craig, welcome to the Narrow Path.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Yeah, I studied under a Greek and Hebrew scholar, R.B. Thiem Jr. Ever heard of him?
Oh, I know very much about him.
Well, that's not my question. My question is about Zechariah 14.
Mm-hmm.
The chapter seems to start out talking about 70 AD it being destroyed, and then it talks about the millennial reign up until around 9 or 10, and then it seems to go to it says it won't be inhabited again in 11, but it will never be inhabited. And then at 12, it seems to go to another, like a different time, like maybe Satan's little reign or something, because it talks about how the nations that fought against it will be punished, like
their eyes will dissolve in their sockets and their tongues shall melt in their mouths.
And then the survivors of all the nations that attack will go down. And then in the last verse it says, on the day the holy to the Lord will be inscribed on the bells. And then
on the bells of the horses, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then on the day there will be no longer a Canaanite in those houses of the Lord. So that sounds like after it's all like the day of the Lord almost.
So what is your question?
I'm saying, can I get your interpretation, or how do you?
Yeah, you can get my interpretation by listening to my lectures on Zechariah 14. This is a very complex. This is a very complex question.
Oh, okay. Is that all one time? Is that like one period, or has that already happened, like in Israel's past?
I'll tell you that I agree with you that the first verses are talking about AD 70 and the destruction of the temple by the Romans. And I also agree that there's a shift at verse 10. I believe that shift goes to the end of the chapter. And I believe that that whole section, verse 10 through 21, are symbolic and poetic descriptions of features of the present age. And of course, the language is sensationalistic, just like all apocalyptic writing is.
Right.
But as far as going verse by verse and tell you what they mean and why I think they mean that, I do exactly that in my lectures on Zechariah 14.
All right, I'll check that out. So what did you think about R.B. Thiem?
Well, R.B. Thiem, I'll tell you, everybody I know who went to Bible studies under R.B. Thiem.
I was a taper, so I got my tape when I started at 10 when I first became a Christian.
Okay.
And I used to study like 5 days
right, I know.
a week.
I know people. I knew people back in the 70s, especially, who were in home study groups. I was trying to answer you. I'm trying to answer you. Okay. I've known people in the 70s who attended these home groups that listened to RB Themes tapes, and everyone I talked to, I'm sure this wouldn't be true of all of them, so I'm not trying to broad brush them all, but I met these people in many different cities that I traveled to, and every person I met that was into RB Theme used profanity, smoked cigarettes, a lot of them fornicated, and I think there was a connection between the teaching and their actions, because he taught hyper grace, or what he called super grace, I think he called it, and his view, I believe his view is very similar to what is today called hyper grace, which is the idea that, we're saved by a radical kind of grace that is almost compromised by any desire to do good works and or to live a holy life. Now, I can't represent his views completely. I've heard a few of his tapes. Most of my access to his information came from listening to people who went to his Bible studies and what they heard him say allegedly. So most of my information is secondhand. A little bit is firsthand. The main thing I remember about his teaching is teaching super grace, and then the fruit of his teaching among the people I met, and I'm not going to say all people who were taught by him were like this way, was that they had very little concern for moral behavior, which to my mind was a very great negative. All right, let's talk to Steve from Alberta, Canada. Steve, welcome to the Narrow Path.
Hi, Steve. I just want to say I've come to appreciate your ministry, your insights and demeanor since I discovered you a couple of years ago. I have a couple of questions. Why are premillennialists, dispensational premillennialists, so adamant, so inflexible about their view being right and everyone else's view being wrong? It comes across as hubris. It's like a test for orthodoxy, and it shouldn't be. We're not denying the divinity of Christ, the Trinity, or the resurrection when we disagree with them. Yet some of them do make this interpretive issue about the second coming of Christ the litmus test for orthodoxy. I find it disconcerting. Right. And the second question, if you're open to sharing, would you be willing to share your prayer life with us? Are you comfortable detailing how you pray on a daily and a weekly basis? I'd be curious to know that.
All right, I'll see if I have time for both of those. We got all our lines full, but thank you. I will try to address your concerns here. Why are dispensationalists so adamant and so quick to think that those who don't hold their views are heretics? Now, without intending to be offensive, I'm just speaking from my own knowledge of dispensationalists, having been one, having received all my early training under adamant dispensationalists, and having been one myself briefly for the early part of my ministry. And of course now, having ceased to be a dispensationalist, my interaction with them and awareness of them over the past 40 years since leaving it myself. What I say may not apply to everybody, but I know with certainty it applies to a great number of them. And that is to say, most people are adamant about their dispensationalism because they know the Bible so little that they've learned only one way of looking at certain passages like Revelation, Zechariah, Matthew 24, certain passages in Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Isaiah, and they've been taught a certain view of these things, and they have never been curious enough to discover whether those views are correct, and have never studied enough to know whether intelligent people who have always seen those passages differently have any good reason for it. Now, they're a little bit shy about looking into it, as you may notice. It's one of our earlier callers said that he was trying to get his dispensational friends to listen to lectures about another view, and it's hard to get them to. They even ask if he's really a Christian because he has a different view. This is how ignorant they are. They don't realize that there was no Christian who held their views before the year 1800, which means for the first 9/10 of Christian history, no one held the view they hold. And it was a novel innovation that arose in almost the same year that Mormonism arose, and shortly before Jehovah's Witnesses arose. Now, I'm not saying that dispensationalism is exactly as heretical as Mormonism or Jehovah's Witnesses, but in the 1800s, a lot of new ideas, which never had been believed or taught in the church, were introduced by persons who said they were seeing things, which were lost truths, which had been lost since the time of the apostles, and that they were now the ones who saw it correctly. And all of these groups gathered huge followings. Mormonism is enormous. JWs are extremely numerous. Dispensationalists is probably the most profitable of all, and has spread within evangelical Christendom because it does not deny some of the basic truths of Christianity that Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses do. They were all novelties. They were all novel ideas that came up in the 1800s. The difference being Christians rejected Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses because they denied the deity of Christ and the Trinity. Dispensationalists at least acknowledged the Trinity and the deity of Christ. So the evangelical guard was not up with them as it was with these others. And frankly, dispensationalism came at a time and usually reaches people who have never really studied the Bible before in any depth. And the dispensationalists seem to have the answers to everybody's questions. And frankly, the Bible, it's hard to get to know the Bible thoroughly without several years of study. So when you find somebody who will teach you verse by verse through the Bible in 2 years, like say, or 3, like for example, like many Calvary chapels will do, and they are giving you the dispensational understanding, it's like a prefab interpretation on the Bible, which would take you maybe a decade to study out on your own. So, hey, let's save time. It's a little bit like what I was saying about my knowledge of Greek. I could spend a decade learning to read Greek, or I can just consult the people who are the experts in Greek. The difference is there are recognized experts in Greek that all agree with each other, because Greek doesn't have infinite meanings. But eschatology, for example, has multiple opinions out there about it, and dispensationalists simply are one of them. Now, those everything they've learned is about dispensationalism, they feel that to challenge it is to challenge the Bible itself or to challenge Christianity itself. And this is why they get upset when they find someone who does that. It threatens them a little bit because they know they can't defend it. If you come up with arguments against their interpretation of certain passages, they are absolutely incapable of giving an equally good defense to counter the challenge. And that threatens people a lot. People want to just say, listen, I've made up my mind. I'm settled. I'm comfortable. I'm in a group that teaches this. Do not bother me with the suggestion that I might have to restudy this all from scratch. That seems very threatening to me. So go away. And I think that is very often what is going on in the mind of a dispensationalist. I'm not saying all, but I know of many. I know from the inside. I know many who that is exactly their thought process. All right, let's talk to Carolyn from Seattle. Hi, Carolyn.
Oh, my goodness, I'm on. Hi, Steve. I love you. I love your show. I love everything about you. My question is to do with CRT. Man, I'm so surprised it got on. Clergy response team that I'm sure my ex-pastor is into, and I've read many articles, and they tell you to ask the pastor, but the pastors have to sign a non-disclosure that they'll never talk about it, that they've signed up. How do you ask a pastor and try to get the truth out of them?
Well, you mean to say there are pastors who they've signed an agreement that if they believe in CRT, they will never say so when asked?
Oh, yeah.
I didn't realize that.
They signed an agreement that they won't talk about it. And there's hundreds of thousands, apparently, at this point, who have signed up with the FEMA business, and they can't talk about it.
I didn't know about that. That is a shame. Yeah. Well, I would just say, if you're trying to know what a pastor thinks about it, I would ask him privately. I mean, if he said he won't talk about it, he probably means he won't preach about it. But I doubt that.
No,
Any
he can't.
preacher,
He can't divulge at all. That's part of
really?
the agreement.
In other words, he has to live in darkness rather than walk in the light. Well, I'd have to say that's quite a compromise in itself. Imagine a pastor agreeing that he will not tell people what he really believes about something. That means he's got something he's ashamed of.
About Romans 13 and how you should obey everything the government says. He'll go that far. In fact, mine has. And that's why I suspect that he's probably signed it. I just don't know how to ask him that I could get the truth out of him.
Yeah. Well, I can't tell you how, because I've never associated with pastors who were deliberately secretive about their beliefs. I have known pastors who gave up their dispensationalism but didn't mention it because they were in a dispensational denomination, and they just preached about other things. They didn't, I don't see any reason why someone has to make an issue of dispensationalism if you can preach discipleship and preach Christian theology, avoiding the controversial subjects. But on the other hand, if anyone had asked these pastors, they would have admitted, yeah, I'm not a dispensationalist anymore. So it's hard to imagine a pastor who'd say, well, I'm not allowed to tell you what I believe. Well, who are you trying to please? Who's restricting you? Who do you answer to, God or man? I have no idea how any pastor would ever take that position, but I guess I'm not surprised that some do, because pastors typically take a lot of non-biblical positions, even non-Christian positions, that perplex me. I don't understand it. But how to get that information out of him, I don't know. Maybe it's if he's not allowed to divulge it, maybe it can't be gotten out of him. But my concern then would be, if I don't know what he believes about, critical race theory, I'd listen to his preaching. And if he doesn't preach anything that's untrue, I'd be unalarmed. If he starts saying things that are not true, I would be alarmed. And I wouldn't be, I don't know that he'd have to tell me whether he believed in critical race theory or not. If that view was coming out, even subtly, in his teaching, I would confront him about it. If that view wasn't coming out at all, even subtly, I would see it as a harmless matter. Although I would not see it as a harmless matter that he's willing to say, I will never tell anybody what I believe. Because obviously a preacher has no other obligation than to tell people what he believes. Anyway, it's a strange development in the modern church. A lot of corruption in the modern churches, a lot of compromise on the part of pastors. This is one reason why so many Christians who are serious about following God have left the organized churches, because pastors have made these very compromises. And so many people have sought alternative forms of church, home churches and other organic type fellowships, because frankly, institutional churches, though some of them are good, an awful lot of them are bad. And it's not always easy in a given town to find a good one in the first half a dozen churches you visit. And if you visit 5 or 6 churches and they all have these bad things about them, frankly, most people get a little tired and a little discouraged and look for something, start something else perhaps. I'm sorry to hear this. But I'm also sorry that I'm out of time. I'm going to cut off here in about 10 seconds. You've been listening to The Narrow Path. My name is Steve Gregg. We are listener supported. You can learn more about us. You can even donate if you want at our website, thenarrowpath.com. Let's talk again tomorrow.